Okay, here we have Source Searcher, books and dictionaries window has been enlarged. Here's Webster's 1828 dictionary. Here's our word scholar. And right here you have the word etymology. We won't, for the sake of time, we won't read that part. But notice here, if you will, Webster's first definition of the word scholar. One who learns of a teacher. Oh, come on. One who is under the tuition of a preceptor. A pupil. Now here's an interesting definition. A disciple. That's very interesting. If I recall correctly, didn't Jesus say something about the disciple not being greater than his master? Let's take a quick look at that. As a matter of fact, I already have it open. It's in Matthew chapter 10, verse 24. I minimize this. Let's bring up the Bible window here. Here it is, Matthew 10:24. The disciple is not above his master, nor the servant above his Lord. So a scholar can actually, a disciple is a scholar. And then Webster goes on to say, hence any member of a college, academy, or school, applicable to the learner of any art, science, or branch of literature. You see here he says any member of a college, academy, or school. So when you think about it, when you think about it, a first grader can be considered a scholar. A kindergartner could be considered a scholar. So in other words, back in 1828, just as we saw in 1 Chronicles 25:8 and Malachi 2:12, a scholar is another word for student in the Bible. And of course, down here you have some of his other definitions, a man of letters, and so forth. I thought this one, number 4 here, was particularly interesting. One that learns anything as an apt scholar in the school of vice. Found that one pretty interesting, especially given the way how prideful and arrogant a lot of people who call themselves scholars, especially so-called Bible scholars and Greek scholars, tend to be. I found this particularly interesting. And then of course the last one here, a pedant, a man of books, and then he gives this little sentence as a example of how this definition is used. I guess this was the least common use of the word back in that day. All right. That's Webster's 1828 dictionary. Now let's see how a modern dictionary defines the word scholar. Here you have the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Let's move it down here, up here a little bit more so you can see better the whole word. Here's our word scholar. And note the definition they give. A person who has studied a subject for a long time and knows a lot about it. An intelligent and well-educated person who knows a particular subject very well. And that's what most people think when they hear the word scholar. And of course, then you have this little one down here, someone who has been given a scholarship. And then underneath that, they have a full definition of scholar. And of course, the first one, now here, the first one they give is basically just a summary of what Webster's 1828 dictionary said. And then you have just a repeat of this one right up here under number 2, and then a repeat of this one right here under number 3, a holder of a scholarship. But when most people think of the word scholar, this one right here is what usually comes to mind. Let's take a look at one more modern dictionary before we move on here. Okay, here you have the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language. And this was the main dictionary that I used when I was in college. I think it is the #1 dictionary for most college students. Although I do believe there's also another edition, another one just like this one, or a college edition of this same dictionary called the American Heritage College Dictionary, I think it is. I don't quite remember. It's been a while since I've seen a copy of that one. But this was the one, I think this is, if I'm not mistaken, this is one of the main ones used among college students, the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language. But anyways, notice how they define it. Here's our word scholar. Notice the first definition: a learned person, a specialist in a given branch of knowledge. And then they give you the example of a classical scholar. Then down here they have the student definition. And number 3 is once again the holder of a student holds or has held a particular scholarship. And then they give you the etymology. And just so you can see that this is indeed a modern dictionary, notice down here, the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language, 5th edition, copyrighted 2014. So this is the most recent edition of this dictionary. That's about as modern as you can get. But notice the first definition that comes up is what most people normally think when they hear the word scholar. And yet in the Bible, a scholar is just simply a student. Very interesting.